Hi, I know I'm just a cat, but I believe in kindness. If you click subscribe under this video, you'll make my day.
It always starts the same way, with that sickly sweet tone in my mother's voice as she calls us together like we're a perfect little American family, ready for some wholesome fun, as if the cracks in the walls and the knives behind every smile weren't real. The house looked the same as it always had: perfectly polished hardwood floors, a faint lemon vanilla scent in the air from the candle Mom always lit when company came over, and a dining room so stiff and pristine it felt more like a museum exhibit than a place anyone actually lived in. I hadn't been back here in over a year, not since the last time she found a new way to make me feel like the backup daughter, the one she never bragged about. I'd almost managed to forget what it felt like to be in this house, but the minute I stepped inside, it was like stepping back into a version of myself I thought I'd outgrown. The quiet one, the easy target, the one who never fought back. Trish was already there, of course, wearing that smug, over-practiced smile that could have been printed on a billboard. She was the type who still wore makeup to family game night, still curled her hair in soft waves like she was trying to sell us something, probably the illusion that her life hadn't completely fallen apart behind closed doors. She greeted me like I was the UPS guy. "Oh, hey, Jenna," she said, with that fake cheer, the kind that stinks of condescension. "Still doing your little houses thing?" I smiled, but it was the kind that didn't reach my eyes. "Still living in Mom's guest room?" She blinked. That little twitch in her left eye told me she wasn't expecting that. But before anything could escalate, Mom swept in with a tray of store-bought canapes she was definitely going to lie about baking herself. She kissed my cheek like a politician and said, "Now, girls, let's not start. Tonight's supposed to be about fun, family, togetherness." That was rich, coming from the woman who once told me, at 13, that Trish was the daughter she prayed for, and I was the one she learned patience from. We all filed into the living room like we were going through the motions of a tradition that had long since lost its soul. Dad was already nursing his second bourbon, sinking into his leather recliner like he hoped it would swallow him whole. Grandma sat near the fireplace with her oversized wine glass, wearing her signature leopard print robe and offering commentary that teetered between genius and dementia. Honestly, she was the only one I was looking forward to seeing. Charades was Mom's idea. It always is. I swear, she chooses games where she can sit back and judge people under the pretense of fun. It started innocently enough, with Trish acting out Titanic by dramatically clutching her chest and pretending to drown, which earned a chorus of laughter and an exaggerated, "Oh, Trish, you're so good at this," from Mom. Then it was my turn. I drew Angry Ostrich of all things and decided to go all in, flailing my arms and stomping like a drunk flamingo with attitude. Grandma cackled. Dad actually smiled, but Trish rolled her eyes, and Mom gave me that tight-lipped smirk she reserves for moments when I remind her I exist. Then it happened. So casual, so deliberate, like a sniper shot masked by a firework. I was mid-flap when Mom leaned over, not bothering to lower her voice much, and said, "Sweetheart, let your sister win. It's the only win she'll ever get." The room didn't go silent. Not immediately, it took a second. Dad kept sipping his drink. Trish looked smug, like she hadn't heard the insult buried inside the compliment. But Grandma froze, her wine glass hovering just above her knee. I stopped mid-ostrich and stood there, stunned, not because it was the first time she said something like that, but because it was the first time I didn't feel the urge to shrink under it. I'd prepared for this moment. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but I had something. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone, brand new, paid in full, thank you very much, and tapped the screen. I didn't say a word as I held it up for everyone to see. A video started playing, one I had filmed just 2 days earlier. Me, walking through the front door of a sun-drenched house on the coast, the camera following me as I greeted the clients, a couple in their 50s who shook my hand like I was handing them the keys to paradise. The angle shifted to the massive sold sign planted on the lawn, my name in bold lettering right beneath it. The closing price flashed briefly, 7 figures, clear as day. The date? Just last week. I let the video speak for itself. Trisha's jaw tensed. Mom's face didn't change, but her fingers clenched the wine glass tighter. Grandma, bless her soul, whispered, "Well, I'll be damned," and took a long, dramatic sip. It wasn't about showing off. That wasn't the point. I didn't care if they thought I was successful or not. I stopped needing their validation years ago. But there's a specific kind of satisfaction that comes from dropping a truth bomb in a room full of people who built a narrative without you in it. For years, I let them tell the story. Trish was the successful one, the married one, the polished one. I was the mess, the one who couldn't finish college, the one who changed jobs every other year. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I had built something real, quietly, relentlessly, and I didn't owe them a single explanation. The video ended. Silence lingered, heavy and awkward, like smoke after a firework misfires. I put the phone away and said, as casually as I could muster, "I figured if we're playing charades, I might as well bring something real to the table." That's when Grandma snorted and nearly spilled her wine. Dad looked away. "Trish?" She stood up and walked out of the room without a word, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome counting down to something none of us could predict. Mom turned to me, her smile gone, replaced by that cold, calculated expression she only uses when she feels control slipping through her fingers. She leaned in, close enough that only I could hear, and said through clenched teeth, "You think one deal makes you better than her? Then us." She met her gaze, unwavering. "No," I said, "but it sure makes me free." And in that moment, I realized something else. This wasn't just game night. This was war. And I had finally brought weapons. The thing about families like mine is that nothing is ever said outright. Everything operates on a system of unwritten rules, silent comparisons, and the occasional offhand remark that slices you open just enough to bleed, but not enough for anyone to admit it was intentional. Growing up under this roof was like living on stage without ever being handed a script. Expected to know your role while your sister got the spotlight, the applause, and the safety net, while you learned how to balance on a tightrope just to stay in the scene. It wasn't always obvious. My parents didn't scream, didn't beat, didn't throw dishes across the room. But what they did do was far more insidious. They labeled, they dismissed, they decided early on who was worth investing in and who was only there to make the other one look better by comparison. Trish, my older sister by 2 years, had been the golden child since birth. If she got a B+, it was the teacher's fault for not recognizing her genius. If I got an A-, it was a fluke that probably wouldn't happen again. Trish wore her ambition like a tailored suit, sleek and presentable, always knowing the right words to say and how to tilt her head during family photos to make her look angelic. She joined every club, dated boys who came from the right neighborhoods, and somehow always knew how to make Mom feel needed and Dad feel important. She was their prize, their investment, the one they pushed forward while quietly nudging me back. I was the weird one, the artistic one, the one who got lost in books and doodled on napkins and didn't smile the right way during church. I tried. God knows I tried. I joined the same clubs, signed up for the same classes, even dated a guy from her crowd once, but it always ended the same way. With Mom telling me not to compete, that Trish needed this more, or Dad brushing off my achievements with a grunt and a nod while uncorking his third drink of the evening. They weren't cruel in ways people understood. They were cruel in ways that made you question your own sanity. And for a long time, I believed them, that I wasn't enough, that my place in this family was to be the backdrop against which Trish's glow could shine even brighter. But what they didn't realize was that being underestimated can be the most powerful fuel in the world, especially when you learn how to use it without letting it consume you. When I dropped out of college in my second year, it wasn't because I was lazy or aimless. It was because I realized, for the first time in my life, that I didn't need their damn roadmap. I wanted something else, something tangible. I got my real estate license, worked night shifts to afford the fees, and cold called people from coffee shops until my throat burned. I failed more than I succeeded in those early years, but every failure taught me something, and none of them killed me. Meanwhile, Trisha's perfect world began to rot from the inside, though no one dared speak it aloud. Her high school sweetheart-turned-husband was cheating on her by their 5th anniversary. Her lavish wedding, which Mom still talked about as if it were a coronation, ended up being the last moment of real joy she ever had in that marriage. She tried to hold it all together for appearances, but the cracks widened, especially when the money dried up and the investments she and her husband made started collapsing one by one. I found out from a mutual acquaintance that they were underwater on their mortgage, their credit cards maxed out, and that Trish had started selling skincare products from her Instagram just to keep up the illusion of having it all. But you'd never know it at the dinner table. You'd never know it from the way she still walked into a room like it belonged to her. When she stormed out after my little video surprise, I could feel the pressure shift in the room like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Mom followed her almost immediately, no doubt to coddle her, to remind her that I was just being dramatic, that she was still the chosen one, and this was just a temporary embarrassment. I stayed seated, letting the silence wrap around me like a second skin, feeling both exposed and strangely powerful. Dad poured another drink and retreated to the sunroom, where he always disappeared when things got real. And Grandma, bless her, just kept sipping her wine like she'd been waiting her entire life for this night to finally come. It didn't take long for the whispers to begin. The next morning, I came downstairs to find the kitchen unusually quiet. Mom sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, her hands folded neatly like she was conducting a board meeting. She didn't look up as she said, "I hope you're happy with yourself, embarrassing your sister like that." I leaned against the counter, took my time making a cup of tea, and replied, "I didn't say a word. All I did was show something real." She finally looked up, her eyes hard and unreadable, and said, "You're not supposed to win. That's not your role here." And there it was, laid bare in 7 words. You're not supposed to win. Not you can't win, or you don't deserve to win, but you're not supposed to. It wasn't about ability or worth. It was about narrative, about keeping the story intact. Trish was the daughter who succeeded, even if she was barely hanging on, and I was the one who stumbled. Even if I was quietly building something solid, my success wasn't a threat because it was impressive. It was a threat because it disrupted the script they had written for this family a long time ago, one where I never left the shadow. She stood up, placing her coffee cup in the sink with deliberate force, and added, "I don't know what you think you're proving, Jenna, but all you're doing is dividing this family." I stared at her for a moment, really stared, and realized that she genuinely believed that. In her mind, I was the villain for refusing to play the losing role. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I picked up the envelope I had left on the counter, the framed copy of the closing documents for the property I had just flipped on the coast, and left it right there next to her cup, not out of spite, but as a quiet, undeniable fact. I left the house that morning to go meet a contractor for my next project, but the image of her face when she opened that folder stayed with me the entire drive. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about me proving a point. It was about the shift, subtle, irreversible, and long overdue. The kind of shift that forces people to see you in a new light, even if it blinds them. And that was only the beginning. There's a strange kind of silence that settles over a house when the illusion starts to unravel. Not the peaceful morning kind of silence that feels like a fresh start, but the heavy, stiff silence that comes after someone finally says the thing no one else dared to. And now all that's left is the sound of suppressed breathing and unspoken thoughts clinging to the walls like smoke. That's what it felt like when I walked back into the living room the morning after my little revelation during game night. The one where I shattered the long-standing dynamic by simply pressing play on a video that didn't lie, didn't embellish, and didn't leave any room for interpretation. The old rules no longer applied, and everyone knew it, though none of them seemed ready to admit it out loud. Least of all Trish, who had disappeared into the guest room Mom still pretended wasn't hers. The house smelled like reheated cinnamon rolls and fresh passive aggression. Mom was clattering dishes a little too loudly in the kitchen, as if she needed every drawer slam to remind me that I'd disrupted her carefully curated family theater. Dad had vanished, most likely out in the garage or the golf course, depending on how badly he needed to pretend this wasn't happening. Grandma was reading a mystery novel in the sunroom, glasses perched on her nose like she was waiting for Act 2 to start. And Trish? She emerged 2 hours late, with makeup applied just slightly too carefully, like she was using her eyeliner to draw back control across her face. She sat across from me at the breakfast table without saying a word at first, sipping her coffee like it had personally offended her, her fingers twitching slightly with a restlessness she couldn't quite suppress. I didn't speak either. There was no reason to. The facts were laid out already, my success, her struggles, the roles reversed in real time, and the weight of that truth was doing all the work. But Trish was never one to let silence linger when she felt cornered. She had to talk, to twist, to spin a new narrative before the one taking shape could solidify beyond her control. "You didn't have to show off like that," she finally said, her voice low but edged, carefully calibrated to sound wounded rather than bitter. "It wasn't the place, Jenna. That was supposed to be a family night." I smiled, not smug, not hostile, just tired. And what was I supposed to do? Nod along while Mom took another shot at me? Pretend I haven't built something just because it doesn't fit your comfort zone? She flinched, only slightly, but enough. And that's when I saw it. Not the anger, not the usual defensive superiority, but something else. Panic, vulnerability, the kind that seeps out when the image you've depended on to define yourself starts to crack. And there's nothing underneath but fear. "You don't know what I've been dealing with," she said. And this time her voice was unsteady, almost hoarse. "It's not all Instagram filters and brunches, Jenna. I've been holding this family together while you were out playing entrepreneur." That word, playing, landed like a slap, but I let it slide because it revealed more about her than it did about me. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, my voice even. "Is that what you tell yourself? That you're the one holding us together? Because from where I'm standing, you've been drowning quietly and dragging everyone down with you, while calling it grace." Her eyes welled up, and for a second, just a split second, I felt it, pity, that old reflex of mine that used to kick in every time she faltered. The part of me that wanted to reach across the table and offer comfort, even if I knew it would cost me. But not this time. Not after years of being the cushion she fell on while I bled beneath her heels. The conversation might have ended there, except that Grandma, who I thought had been fully immersed in her paperback novel, suddenly cleared her throat from the next room and called out, "You girls do realize I have ears, right? And that one of you has been lying for a hell of a long time?" We both froze. Trish turned pale. I looked over and saw Grandma rising slowly from her chair, folding her book with care, like a judge closing a case file. She shuffled into the room with that dignified authority she carried like a second skin. Not because she demanded respect, but because she earned it long before any of us were born. "I've been around long enough to know when someone's selling smoke," she said, eyes locked on Trish. "And sweetheart, your fire went out a long time ago." Trish opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Mom appeared in the doorway, hands still damp from the sink, sensing the shift, trying to reclaim control the only way she knew how, by changing the subject. "Let's not do this right now," she said quickly, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "It's a family matter." Grandma didn't flinch. "Exactly, and I'm still family, in case you've forgotten. Maybe the only one here not trying to sell a version of the truth that fits their ego." Then, with all eyes on her, she turned to me. "That video? That was the first honest thing I've seen in this house in years. You didn't embarrass this family, Jenna. You just stopped lying for it." With that, she turned and walked back to her chair, leaving behind a silence that no one could sweep under the rug. Later that afternoon, I walked past the guest room and saw Trish on the phone, voice hushed and panicked, scribbling figures on a notepad, mortgage numbers, overdue bills, the unraveling that I had suspected, but never fully witnessed until now. She didn't see me, but I watched long enough to realize that the golden child wasn't just cracking, she was crumbling. I walked outside, breathing in the crisp air, feeling a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. Because revenge, as satisfying as it might feel in the moment, doesn't come without its ghosts. Watching Trish fall apart wasn't sweet. It wasn't thrilling. It was messy and human and confusing. I didn't want her to lose. I just wanted to stop being the one who always had to. And as I stood there on the porch, staring out at the horizon, I realized something else. There was more to come. The biggest truth hadn't been told yet, and when it was, none of us would be the same. It's funny how the moment power shifts in a family. When someone who's always been kept in the shadows suddenly starts casting the longest shadow of all, people don't react with grace or introspection or anything resembling humility. No, they react the way all people drowning in the myth of their own control do, with desperation, denial, and a need to salvage whatever fiction they've convinced themselves is truth. By the time the sun had set that same day, I could feel the tension in the house like static just before a thunderstorm. Every movement, every glance, every word felt carefully measured, like we were all dancing around a landmine that someone knew was going to explode. They just didn't know when or how loud it would be. The thing about secrets is that they don't stay buried just because people stop talking about them. They fester, they grow legs, they crawl into corners of your mind and wait. And that house, our family's pristine little temple to appearances and selective memory, was built on layers of those secrets, each one stacked on top of the other like foundation bricks mortared with denial. I had known for a while, from the moment I got my first real commission and started to understand how money actually worked, that something in my parents' finances didn't add up. The fancy vacations had stopped, but no one said why. The cars got older, but Dad still dressed like he owned half the block. The vacation property they used to visit every summer slowly disappeared from family talk, like an ex-uncle who drank too much and no one wanted to mention again. What no one realized was that while they were all busy pretending I was still the failure daughter chasing pipe dreams, I was quietly connecting dots they hadn't bothered to hide very well. And once I figured out the numbers, how deep the debt went, how many missed payments had piled up under the rug of denial, I saw the opportunity. I didn't take pleasure in it at first, I really didn't. But when the bank listed the old beach property for public sale, the one Mom used to parade around like a symbol of our family's success, I knew what I had to do. I called in a favor, kept my name off the paperwork, and made the offer anonymously through a shell LLC that I had created months earlier for another flip. It was clean, it was legal, and most importantly, it was mine. So when I casually dropped that little fact over dinner, after Mom insisted on cooking a proper family meal and forced everyone to sit through another performance of Normalcy 101, I didn't do it to gloat. I did it because I needed them to see it. I needed them to hear me say it out loud. I leaned back in my chair, fork suspended in midair, and said almost offhandedly, "By the way, I closed on a property last week. That old beach house. The one you said I'd never be able to afford, even with my cute little house thing." The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Trish dropped her wine glass. Mom went stiff, like someone had shut off the power inside her. Dad cleared his throat, eyes narrowing, like he'd just realized I wasn't bluffing. I kept talking, not for drama, but because the facts had weight now, and I wanted every syllable to land like a reckoning. "You know," I said, "it's funny. I used to walk through that house thinking maybe one day I'd be allowed to stay there longer than a weekend. Turns out I just had to wait for the foreclosure notice to hit the county records." Trish, pale and trembling, spat out something unintelligible, probably a denial or a half-hearted insult, but I didn't even turn toward her. My eyes were on Mom, who was slowly, meticulously folding her napkin like it was the only thing in the room she could still control. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight, that cold, familiar tone that had once reduced me to silence. "You bought that house to humiliate us," she said. I didn't blink. "No," I replied. "I bought it because it was available, because it had potential, and because nobody else saw the value in it anymore. Kind of like me, I guess." It was then, in that brittle pause after the truth had landed, that I twisted the knife, not out of spite, but because I wanted them to understand just how far they'd underestimated me. I'm turning it into an Airbnb, I said slowly, deliberately. Beachfront, remodeled, fully booked through July already. And I'm calling it the Golden Sisters Folly. Thought it had a nice ring to it. That was when Mom slapped me. It wasn't hard, not the kind of slap that leaves a mark or makes a sound loud enough to echo, but it was enough. Enough to silence the room, enough to freeze Trish in her seat, enough to make Dad put down his drink for the first time in 15 minutes. I didn't flinch, I didn't say a word, I just looked her in the eyes, and in that look, I gave her everything she refused to accept. I wasn't scared of her anymore. I wasn't playing by her rules. I wasn't hers to control. And then, in what might have been the most surreal moment of the entire night, Grandma slowly pushed back her chair, stood up with the dignity of someone who had seen every kind of lie this family had ever told, and said with a voice that rang sharper than any slap, "Well, it's about damn time someone slapped back." No one moved. No one spoke. We just sat there, a family built on myths and pretty pictures, suddenly cracked wide open at the dinner table. I left a few minutes later, not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to say. I'd already said it. With my work, with my choices, with my refusal to play their game anymore. And as I drove away that night, past the darkened homes and well-kept lawns of a neighborhood that had always felt like it belonged to someone else, I realized something that would change everything going forward. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about legacy, about rewriting the rules. Not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been told to sit down and stay quiet while someone else writes their story. And I had only just begun. It's strange how quickly a house that once echoed with forced laughter and ritualized family dinners can turn cold, not in temperature, but in energy. Like the walls themselves finally got tired of hearing the same tired lines, the same choreographed arguments, and decided they weren't going to absorb any more of it. The next morning, when I came downstairs for what I knew would be my final meal under that roof, I noticed the air felt thinner somehow, as if everything was suspended in a moment between fallout and transformation, and I could practically feel the entire structure holding its breath, waiting to see what would break next. Trish hadn't come out of her room, or if she had, she'd done it quietly, like a burglar trying not to wake the house she no longer felt entitled to. Mom's voice, which usually filtered through the halls like a constant low hum of disapproval, was noticeably absent. Even the kitchen, with its polished surfaces and strategically placed fruit bowl, looked like a set waiting for its lead actress to return. I sat alone for a while, sipping black coffee, staring at the floral wallpaper I used to trace with my fingers. When I was a teenager, trying to disappear into patterns and pretend I didn't hear the conversations in the next room about how well Trish was doing, about how maybe Jenna will find her way too someday. It's not that I had imagined revenge to be glamorous, or even clean. No, I knew better than that. But I think a part of me had hoped, irrationally, that exposing the truth would give me some kind of emotional closure, some definitive moment where I'd feel finished, victorious, whole. But what I felt wasn't triumph. It was clarity. It was a quiet, cold understanding that winning doesn't feel like they say it will. Not when the people you've outmaneuvered were supposed to be the ones who loved you unconditionally. I heard the shuffling before I saw him. Dad wearing the same robe he's had for probably 20 years. His hair thinner, his face a little more sagged than I remembered, like time had finally caught up to him all at once. He didn't say anything when he sat down across from me, just poured himself a cup of coffee and stared into it like it might explain something to him if he stared hard enough. When he finally did speak, his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Not fragile, but resigned, like he was no longer pretending to be the silent patriarch holding it all together. "I knew the house was gone," he said, eyes still locked on the steam rising from his mug. "I saw the paperwork come through the mail, saw your name. Well, not yours exactly, but I recognized the move. Smart, real smart." I didn't respond immediately. There was no need. He hadn't come for a fight. He had come to tell the truth, or at least his version of it. "I never stood up for you," he continued. And this time he looked at me, really looked. Not because I didn't believe in you, I just didn't know how to go against her. Your mother, she built this idea of what our family was supposed to look like, and I let her run with it because it was easier than dismantling it. I figured if I stayed out of the way, you'd be all right, maybe even tougher for it. I told myself you didn't need me to say anything. It would have been so easy to tell him that wasn't enough, that his silence was a betrayal in its own right, that watching someone drown and refusing to throw them a rope because you think they might learn to swim isn't noble, it's cowardice. But I didn't say that, because I wasn't here to punish. I had already done enough damage, intentional or not, and whatever reckoning had passed between us didn't need more fuel. Instead, I just nodded, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement that I had heard him. Maybe not forgiven him, but heard him. He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a folded check, slid it across the table without a word. I glanced at it only briefly, enough to see that the amount was not insignificant, and enough to know I wasn't going to deposit it. Not now, maybe not ever. It wasn't about the money, it never had been. I left it on the table when I got up to leave, letting it sit there like a question he'd have to answer for himself. Before I walked out the door, I stopped by Grandma's room. She was packing, slowly and methodically, her leopard print robe draped over the chair, her suitcase half full of carefully folded clothes. She looked up at me and smiled, the kind of knowing smile that says, "I've been waiting for this day longer than you know." "You heading out too?" I asked, leaning on the door frame like I used to when I was a kid and needed a safe place to breathe. "I think I've watched this circus long enough," she said. "Besides, I've got a friend with a spare room and an actual sense of humor." I chuckled, grateful for her steadiness, her unshakable presence in a house that had lost all sense of anchor. She walked over and handed me a small box, old and weathered, with my grandfather's initials carved into the top. "He wanted you to have this," she said. "Told me once, years ago, that when you finally stood up and made them listen, you'd understand why he kept it hidden." I took it, not sure what I'd find inside, but already feeling the weight of it in my hands like it carried more than just objects, like it carried a piece of him, and maybe a piece of the version of this family I'd always longed for, but never quite found. When I got to my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a while before opening the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, handwritten, dated from when I was a teenager. My grandfather had written to me, to a future me, talking about what he saw in me, about how he knew I was different, about how he hoped I'd find a way to build something that couldn't be taken from me. There were notes about the house, about how it had been a mistake to put it in Mom's name alone, and at the very bottom, a signed lien transfer, dated, notarized. That house, the family home, it wasn't as safe as they thought. The taxes hadn't been paid in over a year, and now I held the paperwork that could make me its legal owner with one phone call. I stared at the documents, not because I needed more power, but because I realized the final move was mine. And no one else even knew it. I could take it. I could burn the whole legacy down and rebuild it in my name. I could make them watch as everything they used to keep me small became the foundation of something bigger, something better, something they couldn't control. But as I sat there with the key to their undoing in my hands, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt unsure. Because the truth is, power doesn't fix the past. It only makes you responsible for what comes next. I put the lid back on the box, started the car, and drove away. I didn't call the county office. Not yet. I wanted to live in the ambiguity for a while longer, to decide not just what I could do, but who I wanted to be now that the game was mine to end. Maybe I'll file the lien, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll wait until the next family holiday when they least expect it. Or maybe I'll let it sit there, like a loaded gun on the table, a reminder that I no longer need their permission to win. Either way, checkmate was mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to move a single piece to prove it.